Hi, welcome to my podcast. It's called OnThePeiroll. I talk to my guests about anything and everything that's related to Salesforce, CRM, self-development, teamwork, leadership, anything and everything in between those topics. In today's episode, I talked to Kenny Elphick, and he has quite a long career behind him and in front of him as well, but mainly he has such a sterling record in the sales division, in selling, starting from how he started doing that as a young person when a big incident around the 11-year-old mark happened, and how he has taken that throughout his journey. He's worked at Salesforce for about 7 years, and he's sold lots of high value, high tech solutions for clients. And we talk about how similar sales is to delivery. And so I ping him a few things, say, I've had so much issues with sales because of these reasons. And we talk through a lot of them. And I hope you'll listen, because at the end, he tells a story about how he met Mark Benioff and how that meeting gave him an insight to the way the CEO of Salesforce actually works and why he's actually so successful as a leader. I hope you'll stay right to the end, because this was a great conversation and I learned a lot, even though my world in delivery doesn't intersect with sales apart from the pre-sales bit and trying to finesse the statement of work. But it was really great to see how he thinks and how he goes into organization and he helps them. So I really hope you'll enjoy this episode as much as I did making it. Hello, good morning, Kenny. Welcome to my podcast. It's called On the Payroll. How are you today?
Very good, thank you very much. Yeah, enjoying this nice weather that we've got, and more on the weekend apparently.
I know, we were just talking before we got started that I really enjoy the British spring and summer because it's so vibrant with so many colours.
Yeah, it's a fantastic time. Yeah, where I'm right now, my garden office, I can literally just look out across green fields, trees. When I walk across in the morning, I've got the birds singing. It's so different to the commute into London that I used to have to do.
I have seen some of your videos and I am envious that you can actually do that in, just walking and talking in such a great environment. I think those videos actually project a lot of energy, and I think it comes natural when you're just enjoying your surroundings.
Yeah, oh, that's good to hear. It's always great to get feedback like that. But yeah, I certainly feel invigorated when I'm out in the countryside, so it's good to be here.
Thank you. Right, so our mutual friend Mandev introduced you to me, and he said, you have to interview Kenny. He's got some really good insights, and he's met Mark Benioff, and I think that your audience would really appreciate hearing some of the thoughts and insights from him. So that's how we met. And I looked at your profile and I thought, wow, there's just so much in here. I'd like to dig in. But let's just start with you telling us a story of your journey, where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, so that's going to cover many years, so I'm going to make it very compact, really. I guess let me start where I kind of got my motivation, because we all get our motivation somewhere, don't we? And I know very clearly where I got mine, and it was actually from failing. So it was from failing the 11 plus when I was 11. For those that don't know it, that's an entrance exam that some counties still have to get into a grammar school. And I rather late decided I really wanted to pass, and then started working like, a crazy thing, but ultimately I didn't get in. So I went to my second choice of school. And that experience meant that I was just desperate to really prove myself. So I then spent that next year working really hard. I ended up coming top in every exam at that school. And eventually at the end of that year, I got transferred into a grammar school. But for me, I think it was that thing of failing at something that I really wanted and then turning around and saying, what can I do to make this better, that gave me a desire to prove myself. And I think it was that also drove me a lot when I got into selling, which was, I think, another way of helping me to kind of prove myself. So there were a couple of other steps on the way. My first selling probably was selling myself when I was a teenager, trying to get gigs at pubs and clubs, because I'm a musician and singer, have been for a long time. So I had to, that was my first taste of cold calling, literally getting on the phone to workingmen's clubs. Hello, I'm Kenny Elphick. Go away. That was the response I often had. So I sort of started to learn objections and how to handle them. And then I got into recording music. I actually got a record out way back and started to hawk that around some of the bigger record labels. So that was really another experience of selling. Again, selling myself, but having to sort of handle situations in a more corporate environment. Anyhow, long story short, at 21, I decided I'm not going to make it as a pop star, so I'll get into something else. And it was almost by chance I got into sales and into high-tech sales, and that's really where things took off and my career took off. And fairly early on, I sort of focused in on software, and that really led me through to what I do today and what I did for the next 30 years.
That was quite a whirlwind description of what prompted you to get into sales.
Yeah.
It's early exposure to the, as you say, the cold calling, knocking on doors and saying, will you buy me? Will you buy my ware? Will you accept me for, or this thing that I've produced?
Yes.
That gave you the impetus. So has there been anything that changed in terms of how you approach sales? Is there anything different from, when you're trying to get gigs to high-tech sales? Is there any difference in the approach and the people that you talk to in your target clients?
Yeah, there's obviously a huge difference. And I know many of your listeners are probably individuals looking to market themselves. So actually, the process of marketing yourself as the product is quite tough, really, and it was probably a good training for me early on to do that. But obviously, when I got into the world of software, it was another whole ball game, because suddenly you are selling into organizations, some of them eventually quite large. I started off all about activity, so it was all about, I'm just so determined, I'll just do activity. So it was literally, I became the cold calling king when I first started in actual business sales, and threw a lot of activity at it. And then there was a sea change moment that happened to me. It was actually a new manager that came into the company I was working with at the time. And at that time, believe it or not, I had 500 accounts. I thought, this is fantastic. I've got 500, and I put a ring around those accounts. They're mine. I can call them. And if anything, I went into this first meeting with this manager expecting to get some more accounts, believe it or not, because it was all about activity. And he basically said, you've got too many accounts, Kenny. You need to focus. You've got 20, choose that 20, and that's it. And I almost felt like resigning on the spot. I thought, you can't take 480 accounts off me like that. But that was actually the best thing that could have happened to me, because that was a turning point in my career when I went from all-out activity to all-out focus and became, I guess, a big game hunter. And it was no coincidence that about 18 months after that, I won the biggest deal to date of my career with a very large company. It was an international deal and a very important deal, and there's a little story around that we might have time for. But the point is that I learnt about focus. I learnt about really sort of analysing the landscape in terms of the people, the politics, the way decisions get made, and the way you can influence those people, as opposed to before that being all about activity and the product. I was much more product proposition focused. I then became much more people, politics, I guess, decision process focused, which is what you need when you're selling into probably all accounts really, but certainly into larger ones.
That sounds very much like what we do in terms of implementing software. So obviously I'm in the Salesforce ecosystem, and a lot of my audience are as well. So in terms of implementing system, we've got to go in and figure out where they are and meet them at that point before we can implement a successful system. If we don't meet them at that point and we meet them where we think they ought to be or where they're not, then it's not going to turn out right. Do you see that happening as well in the sales cycle?
Absolutely, yeah. And I see real parallels there, because what you guys are doing is something that's going to be very strategic within an organization, and therefore you are also going to be handling politics, people, expectations, and the extent to which you can do that skillfully, as well as use the technical ability that you've got, is going to be the extent to which you are successful. So I think there are very strong parallels, and that the best people that I've worked with, when I was at Salesforce, IBM and some of the other companies in the technical sphere, were the people that also got the politics and the people side of it, and they were able to put the two together, because the landscape is probably more sophisticated than it's ever been now in terms of the buying process. Buyers are more sophisticated in terms of their knowledge, what they know about you, your organization, your customers, your clients, your track records, and you as an individual when you come to them, either as a solo entrepreneur or a salesperson. So you really do have to be very professional, very on your mettle. And there are a lot of things that I work with sales managers and salespeople to do to help prepare them selling and working in that much more sophisticated, buyer-aware arena.
That's very interesting. So if you will indulge me for a moment, a lot of the projects that I've been on and that I have seen, rightly or wrongly, there historically has been a disconnect between delivery and sales.
Yeah.
There is a tension there when we are trying to work together. Mm-hmm. And you are talking about the sophisticated clients, the purchaser, the buyer. And a lot of times in the past, maybe in some of the partners that I've worked in, there seemed to be, like I said, a tension whereby the opportunity is closed, won, we've made the sale, but the promise that we've made doesn't seem to be something that can be delivered realistically.
Yeah.
And there's a mismatch somewhere along the way, the sales cycle, either right at the beginning or throughout. Sometimes when I have been able to develop a good relationship with the sales team, that process is a lot smoother. But Can you talk to me a little bit about how, just aiming this segment at the account management and the sales and the business development team, how can they set things up so that we are able to make promises that we can keep, that we can over deliver and delight the customer? How can we start that process from the beginning?
Yeah, well, it's a great question and a great topic, because ultimately, if you take a company like Salesforce, they came from a place of wanting to deliver something different on the back of all other previous technology that had failed in the CRM space. And certainly when I joined back in 2005, there was a massive focus on that. Everybody was rallying around it. I think there clearly still is, but there was a very big focus. The challenge then comes when you have obviously very, very highly motivated salespeople selling into big accounts, then the handover to customer success and many other parts of the organisation that need to become engaged as you start to deliver, and then potentially also partners who are external to Salesforce but still part of the ecosystem. A lot of it comes down to, I think, the approach and personality type of the salesperson. So my approach was always to build a virtual team. In fact, a lot of my training that I deliver covers virtual teaming, because it's such a critical skill in selling and in many other disciplines like your own. So if a salesperson creates that virtual team as they start to sell to the customer and brings people into that team, like customer success in their own organisation, professional services in their own organisation, obviously the pre-sales organisation, but also partners. If you're going to work with a partner, and I work with a number of partners, obviously that's where I first met Mandev, bring them into the sales process earlier rather than later, so the relationship starts to build. And then at the point that there is that, and it's not a complete handover, because obviously as a salesperson you're always involved in developing the account and growing the account, but as you hand over that particular project to delivery and customer success, there's a much more seamless handover, because they've already got ownership, they've already been part of it, as opposed to a kind of there you go, give me a quote for that, go and install that. Can't talk to you now. I'm off trying to find my next deal. So, some of it does come down to the approach, and you can try and systematize some of that to make sure salespeople do it. But it really is, as you say, critically important to get that handover right and to make the relationship start early enough so you don't get this drop off at the end and then inevitably the expectations aren't met.
That beautifully segues into another topic that I wanted to pick on in terms of what you just said. So you do coaching and you have worked with partners like Manda, for example. So
yeah,
interestingly, I think I have been talking to partners as well. So they are also a section of my target market. So I've been coaching a lot of the project managers and the delivery heads in terms of how to put in project governance and deliver project well. Now, the feedback that I've got has been, sales have made promises and, we can't deliver this moon on a stick.
Yeah.
What can we do? So the only thing I can do is to advise from what to do from then on. You've already got a signed statement of work. How do we work within it to make sure that we're able to deliver as close as possible and try and deliver a project that's successful? However, from where I'm sitting, I can see that the account management division needs help. And a lot of the founders and Salesforce partners that I've spoken to have spun off from them being a technical architect or a solutions architect and thinking, hey, I can do this. My company's billing me out at, so many thousands a day. I'm pretty sure that I can get projects in and do them well. And that's why we've got a lot of little partners kind of like springing up. And the challenge that they have from where I'm sitting is two-pronged. One is they are delivery like me. Mm-hmm. They have maybe done really great projects. They've got customers who are happy with them, but they don't know how to sell. They don't know how to finesse that operations. Mm-hmm. And they don't know how to apply project governance. So they can do the work, but they, the overarching quality. So I've spoken to quite a few on like this part 2 of the process, so to speak, but they're lacking in part 1. So you talked about helping people like Mandev and maybe some potential founders to put together a proper sales organization. Talk me through the steps that you would take and what are the things that you might do with a partner like that.
Okay, well, the way I tend to work is very, very tailored and specific. And I know those words get bandied about a lot, particularly in my area of sales, coaching, training, and enablement. But that is absolutely the way I do it. So if I come into any kind of organization, the first thing I'm looking at obviously is where are they at the moment? Where do they, where do they think they want to be? Because where they actually need to be might not be where they think they want to be, but so you'll have a process of understanding that. And then of course you're looking at the gaps in between. So invariably organizations I'm working with have already got salespeople. They've already got sometimes quite experienced salespeople and some good salespeople and some not so good people. They've all got processes, they've all got CRM tools, all of that stuff. I'm not going into organizations that have got nothing. I'm dealing with actually quite sophisticated sales organizations because they're in high tech and you have to be on your game. But when you then look at where they are and where they want to be, you can then always find a number of gaps. And what I then try to do is put together a program that doesn't go in and say, hey, you need to do this whole new sales process, sales regime, which is the Quest regime. I go in basically and build a program that targets those gaps, but in a way that is a intuitive, progressive kind of program, as opposed to something that just feels, scattergun. So it's taking that very tailored approach, but turning it into a logical program that you can take the organization and the sales leadership team through. Some of my biggest clients, those programs went on for many months and involved multiple workshops across different geographies. In smaller clients, it might be just, a few weeks and just 1 or 2 different workshops. But either way, I'm trying to identify those gaps, put together a program, and then the way I work is I build very specific, very engaging, interactive workshops, either face-to-face or now more often virtually. And I'm starting to move into the space of online training, delivering some elements as well through pre-recorded videos to at least provide a foundation of knowledge that you can then work on when you have the face-to-face time. Don't know if that helps or answers the question, but hopefully.
It does to a certain extent, and I can understand why they need to be bespoke, because all organizations are different, and that's kind of the approach that I take as well. But it would be helpful if you're able to provide an example, maybe just take out the company names, but say company A had this specific issue. So can you just paint that picture for us so that I can have in my head those are the types of problems that could use your skills to help out?
Okay, well let me take again. I'll spare names, but this was a large software organisation, so there were quite a few things that we addressed in it. But one key area that came out of it was that they were losing deals sometimes in the later stages, and they are also having a lot of deal slippage. So that's the kind of problem statement. So we then started to look at, well, why was that? These deals, were being forecast, worked on for quite a long period of time. Obviously, there'd been a level of qualification throughout the process. And it turned out that they were falling through in the final stages of the deal, what we would typically call the closing phases, which obviously involve a lot of contractual stuff, commercial stuff, lots of covering stakeholders. There's a lot that can go wrong in the final stages of a deal. And to some extent, they were leaving that part of the process a little bit to chance. So what we did then is I worked with the leadership team to put together a workshop that focused solely on what we called a transition plan. So it was actually a close plan, but the language we used was a transition plan because we were basically looking to transition from prospects to customers. And that workshop then together, we built a process. So I already had obviously a premeditated idea of what needed to be covered, but we basically went through a process of drawing all of that out. We had a whole side of a room mapped out with these different activity streams, and we broke down, what do the final phases of a deal look like. You've got a commercial stream, you've got a sign-off stream, you've got a due diligence stream, you've got a technical stream, etc. So we streamed all of that out, and then at the end of the process, having done that on paper, we created that, as it happened, it was in Excel, to create a simplified transition plan that those salespeople could then all use to plan the final phases of their deal. And we also turned it into a customer facing plan as well, obviously with slightly less detail, where they could say, okay, Mr. Customer, you would like to go live, because remember, with the customer, you don't focus on what you want, which is signing the deal, you focus on what they want, which is to go live. So we would say, okay, to go live on that date, we need to work back from here to get the project started at this point, which means we need to just sort out the paperwork by this point, nice and low key. But it allowed the salespeople then to start planning back and saying, well, if we're going to be in a position to move forward at that stage, we need to be really looking at some of the commercials and contractuals at this stage, etc. So, we ended up with the output of that those salespeople were much better able to control that final stage of the deal. They could reduce ultimately the number of deals that slipped or fell out altogether because they were managing that process better.
That's such a great example of how just focused attention from somebody like yourself who's seen quite a lot to be able to pinpoint and say, this is the thing that you need to do. And it sounds like there was a lot of buy-in. Yes.
There was, yeah. They're still using that plan. I mean, we started that 3 or 4 years ago. They now call it I think a route to go live plan, which is even nicer really, because it's all about what the customer wants, and they're still using that process and plan today. So yeah.
That's perfect. If it's a software company, route to go live feels to me very inclusive, and that phrase feels very inclusive of the delivery team. So it's not just when we make the sale, that's it. But we need to make sure that they go all the way to go live. So
yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and that's why we started off with transition, and it was then always focused around the project kickoff. But I think that route to go live is even better, because it's all about what the customer gets out of it. So that's the beauty of working with clients, is you go in and you learn from them as well, and you get ideas from them. So if I was doing that workshop again now, I would probably be looking to use terminology like that rather than transition plan, and certainly not close plan, which is very, very sales orientated.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to hop into something that I'm seeing a lot in my feed. In the past, there's always been, you've got your marketing, and then you've got your sales, and now they're calling it revenue operations. Just want to get your thoughts around that, whether, from my point of view, right, I've always looked from delivery over to that side, and there always seems to feel to me like very segregated culture between the marketing, who's out there getting leads, and then the sales, would pick it up, whether it's sales qualified lead or that sort of process. There seems to be a difference in culture. So we just want to get your thoughts around this transition over to this revenue operations model, whether it's a new fandangle term, or whether it's something that a movement that you think should be taken forward.
Yeah. Well, I think it is part of an evolution that's going on that we're all probably seeing, and that is the change in selling that's happened particularly over the last 24 months, when things have, by virtue of what's been going on, had to become much more virtualized. And I think that has meant that people have started to look at other ways of reaching out to clients. They've started to think of themselves, what they can do via their own social media tools, things like obviously LinkedIn. And I think to some extent the discipline of sales, I think, is always a very distinct discipline, and it has a lot of things around it, a lot of skills, a lot of processes that need to be developed. However, I think now marketing and sales are merging in certain areas, particularly the area of the early stages of lead generation, etc., to an extent that you do need to have that integrated approach, especially when you're trying to generate opportunities and leads. I think when you then got into it, you do revert back to some of those very classic sales skills, like qualifying. You really need to be able to qualify an opportunity, or you're going to waste your time and you're going to waste your company's resources. So that's a very key skill. You need to obviously be able to talk to value as opposed to just features and benefits. But again, that's another area where, of course, marketing is highly related. So back to your core question, I think it is the right direction, because I think many parts of the process now are highly integrated, but equally each discipline has its own specifics that it also needs to keep at a very high performance level in order to be successful.
Thank you for that. So that leads me to my next question, which is, do you qualify out your clients? And what are the criteria that makes you think, I don't want to do business with you?
Yeah, well, that's the answer, of course, is yes. I always try and do it respectfully and gently. But I think one of the beauties of running your own business, and I love running Quest, my own sales coaching and consulting business, is that you get to choose who you work with. And that is a wonderful privilege that I treasure and value very much. So one of the first things I'm really looking for is, do we get each other? Are we on the same wavelength? Do they kind of get the way I work, and vice versa? Because if you haven't got that, then you're better off probably going and looking for another client to work with, rather than working with the wrong client, because it isn't ultimately going to work out well for you or for the clients. So that's probably the key thing that I look at to see, can we work well together? And there are lots of things that I am very into, because I've found them to be very successful, like, for instance, mind mapping. And most of the people that I've worked successfully with, both my clients now, but also clients I worked with when I was at Salesforce, clients I worked with at IBM, have been ones that have kind of bought into some of that kind of collaborative, creative type of approach. So now, for instance, I would be probably looking for clients where when I use tools like that and approaches like that, I see them lighting up and going, oh, I like that, as opposed to like, what is that you're doing on the screen? You know, why can't we just have it in Excel, or can't we have just a Word document? You know, that would ring a few little alarm bells, because I'd just be thinking we're probably not going to be working in the same way. So that's one of the key areas. And then obviously I'm qualifying a number of the other aspects. One of the things I'm looking at is their commitments. You know, are they really serious about doing what they're talking about? Will they actually put management time and commitment into it? Because the worst thing is just to be set up for failure, where, you know, they talk about doing something but ultimately they don't get behind it. And when I say getting behind it, it means, you know, at the beginning of a workshop, you might have the management team join it, talk about what they want to get out of it for themselves and for their team. And, you know, when I do what I call share back and feedback sessions, which is kind of the bit where salespeople put their learning into practice, it can be quite pressurized sometimes. I always make sure that the management team are involved in that, and sometimes role play in that, because I want them to be very much part of it. So I'm looking for that as well. And then there's all the other basics. Are they going to invest? Are we actually going to get to a decision? All the good quality housekeeping qualifying that you need to do. So yes, simple answer is yes, I do qualify out if I don't feel we're a good fit, or I don't feel they're really serious about it. And I again enjoy the privilege of being able to do that.
How about any other aspects of the leadership culture that you think? So you talked about, do they have commitment, and whether chemistry, would that be the right word?
Yeah,
whether there's chemistry. Is there anything else in a leadership culture? So as an example, just talking to somebody else, and I was just musing about, you know, for example, at Enron and GE, and how they do, and some of the consulting firms where there's an up or out culture. Whether you hit your target, you don't hit your target, you're out. This high competitive, you know, that's why environment is nurtured, and it's quite detrimental, I think, and I feel. So do you look at those sort of things like compensation and the reward scheme, or any other cultural aspect of an organization that you might feel that, you know, that they're not going to be there for the long run?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose it depends what the focus is. If I'm really thinking about how are we going to be able to work together, and how am I going to be able to get them the outcomes that they want, and are those outcomes realistic? So one of the things I think that I've seen that has definitely marked out the more successful projects, and I think organizations, is in the leadership culture, is to genuinely have a real commitment to coaching. And I don't mean like coaching's a buzzword, yeah, let's say we do coaching, but I mean genuinely a commitment to coaching. And that means not telling, but coaching. So it means not saying to someone, why don't you do it like this, because I've always done it like this and I'm the boss and this is the right way to do it. Instead to say, so how is that way you're doing at the moment working out for you? What might you do differently? You know, what other things have you tried? What other ideas have you got? And then at the end of that, maybe saying, perhaps you might want to try this approach. So I've just, in a very basic way there, highlighted two different approaches. But some people, when they hear coaching, think coaching means, okay, so I'm the experienced sales manager. Let me tell you how to do this. This is how you go in when you qualify. Let me coach you on qualifying now. First of all, you go in and you ask this and you ask that. That's not coaching, that's telling. Coaching is a discipline in its own. And in fact, I do provide a coaching for managers, specifically aimed at sales managers really, training program where I use an established coaching methodology that I've been trained in, and I train them in that, but very specifically towards selling. And it's amazing how differently they go into discussions afterwards. That's not to say there aren't times where you do need to tell, clearly, but you need to have a big commitment for coaching if you truly want your people to grow and become independent.
Amazing. Thank you. So in terms of the some of the audience that I have, they're also, some of them are developers, and they have created a product for the app exchange. They're growing that. How might they think about? So it's quite different. So I'm just flipping it right now. So are those the kind of people that you might coach as well, or are you thinking about, because you mentioned like videos and some e-learning, how would somebody like that be able to learn from you?
Okay, well, there are a range of ways. So I have worked with some very small startup organizations where they've asked me to come in and help them sometimes design a sales process, which I've done for probably a number of companies. And others have then wanted me to come in on real point specific things and help them, and then others we've obviously developed whole programs. But what I'm now looking at doing, and you picked up on it really, is to say, how can I create greater reach? How can I also leverage my time better? And that's where I'm going to be going more into the realm of online learning. So again, very, very tightly focused on sales, both professional sales but also solo entrepreneurs, and using packaging up really the knowledge, the experience that I've got together over the last 30 years. So at the moment I'm working through, where to start, what kind of things will be most useful to people, what sort of size of training modules do I look at, very small mini courses or bigger programs. But ultimately that's where I'm heading. So then people will be able to go on and get training from there. I suppose the shop window to that is what I'm starting to do on LinkedIn. I have been since the beginning of this year, which is putting together short little videos and articles just to, again, get a little bit of thought-provoking knowledge and ideas across and get people engaged that way. And I'm, obviously working with clients directly, still putting together very specific programs. So any number of those ways. The best thing is if someone feels they need some help and they feel that I might be the right person to to work with them, is just to reach out via LinkedIn or whatever, and then we can have a discussion and go from there.
Thanks for that, Kenny. You seem like somebody who doesn't get knocked down very much by life, but do you can you share like one of your worst moments that you've had to face, and how did that change you as a person?
Okay, so you mean in my professional career we're talking about here, yeah?
Feel free to choose.
Yeah, well, because I mean, you say, it's interesting you say that. One of the reasons I started Quest was to basically, I think I had got to a point of almost burning out. I was at a stage really where I'd spent 30 odd years in a very high pressure job. We were investing in property. I think we had something like 16 properties at the time. We had obviously busy family life going on and all sorts of things. And I also lost my younger sister to cancer, and all of that out of the blue came and just knocked me sideways, which was a really strange and awful experience, just because I'd never encountered really anything like that. So I do know what it is to have to have a bit of a meltdown, and I think going through that helped me become much more empathetic. It made me finally step off the very fast treadmill or treadwheel that I'd been on and reappraise things, and actually became a very positive experience, although at the time it was pretty awful. But out of that came a plan to basically create more time in my life, to be much more in control of my time. That's why I then started Quest, because I still realised I wanted to do something related to what I'd previously done, but I didn't want to do it with the same stress level and work rate. So that experience, very difficult when I first went through it, has created really the opportunity now, and being somewhere probably much more rural with more land around us, and my wife and daughter continuing their interest in horses, etc. So it's been a really good thing. So that, I think, was the biggest challenge I probably faced in my professional career. I've had some pretty big challenges as well, and any salesperson knows how awful it is to spend months, sometimes years, working on something, and then for that not to happen for various different reasons. And you need to be able to each time pick yourself up, remotivate, get out there, start generating opportunities again. And sometimes that is very hard, but I think that's something that I have learnt over the years, the ability to pick yourself up when you're knocked down, dust yourself off, start again, get going. And sure enough, you know, you end up being probably even more successful than you thought. Whereas at that moment in time, you kind of thought, it's all over, it's terrible, that's it. So there we go, there's a couple of thoughts there on that topic.
Thank you. How about, let me just rephrase this then. The biggest mistake you've ever made that you've learned the most from?
Biggest mistake that I ever made. Okay, let me pick one thing. This was actually the biggest deal of my career. So it ended up being a $50 million deal. But the lead into it was a disaster. So the lead into it was basically, I had a very successful year. I was at a huge company at the time. I won't say which one. And they wanted me to take on a new account because I managed to turn around one account that had been very difficult. But bizarrely, this was Q4, they wanted a quick deal done around a certain maintenance contract, effectively. And to me, it just felt all wrong. It felt, hang on a minute, I'm going into a new account where I want to build relationships, and the first thing you want me to do is to go in and basically, you know, price hike this particular offering. I just thought, this just doesn't feel right. I was still relatively new into the company at the time, and all my instincts were saying, no, don't do it. But eventually I did do it and went in to procurement. We put this thing on the table and it just blew up. It absolutely blew up. The whole relationship blew up. And I kind of thought, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen. But why were my management team so keen to have this deal done effectively? So what I decided at that point is that in the future, if something didn't feel right, however much pressure I was getting from management, I would not do it. You know, I would not do that because I realized that your company as a salesperson pays your salary, but your customers pay your commission. And the commission is down to how successful you are in meeting their needs and ultimately, therefore, them buying into it. So what then happened was it took us about 18 months to repair the relationship. There were many months of no revenue, low revenue, lots of contention with the client, but painstakingly I rebuilt the relationship and then started a campaign with a group of people within that organisation that then led, after a period of time, to that huge deal, which was a complete turning point where we actually managed to repair the relationship ultimately with procurement and with the other people in that client. So for me, that was a huge vindication of doing the right thing after doing the wrong thing, albeit with the, on the request of my management team.
I'm loving how much parallel there seems to feel between your world and my world. And before this conversation, I wouldn't have thought that it'd be that close. And how you've described it could easily describe some of the feelings that I get when I land a project and I'm looking at a statement of work and thinking, how the heck are we going to do this? It is going to go wrong. It's a car crash in motion.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I feel that when you're on that side of the fence where you are, you could say stop and not get that signature. Whereas on my side of the fence, signature's already there. It's in the contract. Yes. And so then my job is to make sure we fulfill the contract without killing ourselves. And yes, and then it goes wrong as I can, as it unfolds.
That's life. Yeah.
And then it takes time to rebuild that. But during that time, there's lots of mental health issues. There's just so much stress and so much sometimes acrimonious conversations and finger pointing and and then through patience, pain and blood, we get to the other side and you've kind of repaired it, but it's kind of unnecessary, it feels to me. So thank you for sharing that story because it made me feel not so alone, that you guys feel the pain too.
We do, yeah, absolutely.
I want to be really mindful of your time. So I want to make sure that I do get to ask this question because Mandev said that you had a great story about Mark Benioff, and I would really love to hear about if you can share it.
Yes, no, I'm sure I can. So this, I won't say who the customer was, although that is not significant in this story, but we basically, what I decided fairly on when I was in Salesforce is I wanted to get senior people involved. So this was back in 2007 or 8. So I used to have, when there was an opportunity for Mark coming over, I would make sure I tried to get him into my accounts. And that's always a double-edged sword, clearly, because if you screw up, you're going to screw up in front of your CEO and you will not survive. It's as simple as that. But equally, getting Mark in there, and Mark is a great salesperson, a great marketer, a great CEO, it can make a huge difference to your client. And it can also make them feel, very special that they're getting the CEO of this massive growing company. So I was taking Mark into meet it was the global head of IT at a very, very large bank, one of the biggest banks in the UK and the world. And we were driving over to Canary Wharf, which is where they were based. And first of all, the car journey was kind of interesting because I was in there with Mark and also the head of Europe. And it was a barrage of, get me so-and-so on the phone, change the flight for this. And then it was, Kenny, tell me what we're doing today. And I'd start talking to him and then he'd be like, no, cancel that. Actually, we won't do the flight tomorrow. We'll do it the day after. But could you rearrange press for later on? Okay, Kenny, carry on. And I was, there was this like 30 minutes of just hyperactivity going on. When I had gone out of the car, Carl Schachter, who was the head of EMEA, sort of just came over to me and looked at me and said, "Hey Kenny, welcome to my world." But by that time, Mark was already off walking to reception of the bank, and so we went up to the 30th floor, which is the exec floor. We got amazing views out of all of London. And we walked into this meeting room where, the guy hosting the meeting, who's a very senior guy, was already there, and we were waiting for the main visitor to arrive. And instead of, spending a lot of time looking out the window or small talk, I saw Mark looking at the screen where we had Salesforce. So one of the rules with Mark on a call was you always had to make sure Mark was able to demo, because he liked to demo his own software, even though he was now the CEO of the company. And Mark started looking at the screen, the Salesforce homepage that was up there, and became fixated on it. And I kind of looked at Mark, and Carl looked at Mark, and my host looked at Mark and thought, what's going on here, And eventually he just said to Carl, he said, just get me so-and-so on the phone. There's a rendering error on the lower left quadrant on the da-da-da page. I need it fixed. And I was just like, oh my God. First of all, I couldn't see what Mark could see, that level of detail. And instead of just not mentioning it, he actually wanted to sort it out there and then. And what it taught me was, and I think what it also showed to my client, is here's a CEO who's got incredible attention to detail. He's in the midst of a visit to the UK with a gazillion things going on. He's walking into a room and he spots something that isn't right about his software and he gets it fixed. And I just thought, that's pretty cool. So that's a story that I actually, shared a few times afterwards because of it. What I think it showed about Mark's attention to detail, even though at the time I was, sweating as Mark was fixated on this TV screen as opposed to my client.
Thank you for that. So did you close the deal?
We did, yeah. And that particular bank became a huge customer. In fact, one of the biggest in the UK. But it was, and I took Mark in there 2 or 3 times, but that was one that I particularly remember because of the circumstances. And it was always interesting because you might be on the way, just about to arrive at a meeting, and Mark would decide he wants a coffee, and then the limousine would stop. He would charge out with the entourage and walk into Starbucks. You'd be thinking, hang on a minute, we've got 5 minutes before, But you just had to learn to just, breathe in and let Mark do his thing, because he was the boss and already a bit of a rock star in the US by that time, maybe not quite so well known yet in the UK, but he had the way he operated and you had to kind of work with that.
Wow, outstanding. So here's a question then. Would you recommend that leaders be as, have that sort of attention to detail? Because obviously now Salesforce has got a wide range of suite of products through acquisition. Yeah. There's no real way that anyone could know all of it. How do you think, obviously, this was some time ago, how do you think, given your, short snapshot of interaction with him, how do you think he handles this broad array of products?
Well, I don't know Mark well enough to know exactly how he's operating right now, but what I do know is that he's very good at building a really good team about him and attracting really good people into the company. That's something that I think he's done, and he's also brought lots of people in from industry. In fact, 2 or 3 people from that very large bank who were then my customer became Salesforce employees. So they bring a lot of expertise in from industries, from areas, from all kind of different disciplines. But I think it is a challenge now. It's a very broad product set, and therefore, you have to have people that are subject matter experts in each of those, but also people that can see how it all fits together. And I think in your sphere, for the audience that you're working with, that is a challenge, but you probably need those combination of skills. You need to be a business professional that can obviously focus on the problem that someone's trying to fix ultimately and understand that and empathise with the client. But equally, you need to understand how technology can be applied to it, and sometimes a whole raft of technology. But that's where you probably also need to have other subject matter experts that you rely on and you bring in, rather than trying to be all things to everyone.
What a beautiful way to wrap up a truly fascinating conversation, I have to say, Kenny. Like I said, when I started, I had no idea where this would go, but you've had me riveted throughout. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been good fun and nice to sort of talk through all those different things and get some other viewpoints as well. So appreciate it.
Thank you.